Today, we'll be revisiting the biggest fallers, or what consensus deemed the biggest steals of the 2019 NFL Draft. We'll determine who was right on their career projection, the NFL or consensus. There are a few things you might want to know, such as how I compiled this list, how I scored the competition, and so on and so forth, but if you want to know, I'll put a graphic on the screen explaining all of that, so feel free to take the time to read it. Otherwise, let's jump right in. We start with wide receiver Kelvin Harmon, a 4-star recruit from Palmyra, New Jersey. After a dominant year as a high school senior, where he'd lead the entire state of New Jersey in yards, Harmon would find himself as the number 7 player ranked in the state, leading to lots of big-time offers. He'd commit to NC State, where he'd have an excellent college career, capped off by a junior season where he led NC State with 1,186 receiving yards and 7 touchdowns on 81 catches. Harmon decided to forego his final year of eligibility, declaring for the 2019 draft. But despite going into the draft with a consensus ranking of 64 overall, a second-round value, Harmon was picked by Washington in the 6th round, 206 overall, constituting a draft fall of 142 spots from his consensus ranking. His rookie season was unspectacular, as he'd play in 16 games, starting 8 of them, catching 30 of his 44 targets for 365 yards, and no touchdown. But in 2020, he'd have an opportunity to make a name for himself, finding himself as the projected starter at wide receiver alongside Terry McLaurin. Unfortunately for Harmon, he'd tear his ACL in training camp and would miss the entirety of that season. He'd return to training camp for the 2021 season, but would be cut in August, signed to the practice squad in September, and then signed to a futures contract in January of 2022, before ultimately being waived in August of 2022, having only played 1 season with the Commanders. In October of 2023, he'd signed with the DC Defenders of the XFL, where he'd catch 31 receptions for 375 yards and 3 touchdowns before being placed on IR with another injury. Just recently, on July 27th, 2024, Harmon was signed to the Cowboys preseason roster, and as of the making of this video, he's still there competing for a roster spot. The NFL was clearly right on this player, and consensus was clearly wrong up to this point in his career. Harmon has played 1 full season, wasn't particularly productive when he did play, and has been placed on IR more times than passes he's caught since his rookie season. Therefore, we award the NFL 1 point and move to our next player, linebacker Mack Wilson. As an Alabama native, a 2-time high school All-American, and a 5-star recruit, Wilson was naturally given an offer to play for Nick Saban's defense at Alabama. In his last season with the Crimson Tide, Wilson was named the starter, putting together a 71-tackle campaign with 5 tackles for loss and a selection to the All-SEC second team. Wilson decided to forego his senior season, entering the NFL draft as a consensus second-rounder, coming in at number 60 overall on the consensus big board. But in the draft, Wilson wouldn't hear his name called into the 155th overall pick, a 5th rounder, resulting in a draft fall of 95 spots. Wilson had an up-and-down rookie campaign, surprisingly starting 14 games due to an injury to Christian Kirksey, allowing him to rack up 942 snaps. In those snaps, he'd manage 82 tackles, 4 TFLs, a single sack and interception, 34 defensive stops, and 7 PBUs. However, he struggled a bit in coverage, allowing a 79% completion percentage against him and 601 yards, the 10th most for a linebacker in the NFL that season. Things were looking up though, as the Browns released Kirksey, making Wilson the presumptive starter for the next season, with many even predicting that he'd be a breakout player. But the season didn't go as planned. Wilson would start 8 games and end the year with 372 snaps, 39 tackles, 1 tackle for loss, and 2 PBUs. He'd grade out horribly from PFF, receiving a 36.2 defensive grade, putting him as the 168th linebacker in the NFL of 181. His playing time would only go down from there, as the next season he had only 193 snaps, starting 6 games and playing in 14. Heading into the 2022 season, Wilson was then traded to the Patriots, where he'd play in 17 games for them, again grading out as one of the worst linebackers in the NFL with a 27% missed tackle rate, the highest amongst linebackers with over 200 snaps that year, and allowing 78% of passes against him to be completed. But despite a rough season, he'd bounce back in 2023 for the Patriots, only starting 1 game, but he played in all 17, this time putting himself on the map with the 9th best PFF grade, 37 tackles, 4 TFLs, 3 PBUs, 2 forced fumbles, and 12 defensive stops in his 305 snaps. This leads us to present day, where Mack Wilson is currently the presumptive starting linebacker for the Arizona Cardinals heading into 2024, just having signed a 3-year, $12.7 million contract with them in the offseason. Perhaps he's on the upswing, but I still think it's clear that the NFL was right on this player. Consensus was likely intrigued by his label as a former 5-star, but he just hasn't shown it on the field. He's been a 2nd or a 3rd string linebacker the entirety of his career, showing to be a below average to average starter when he's on the field due to missed tackles and struggles in coverage. Up to this point, he's been a depth or rotational piece, so he's definitely been more akin to a 5th rounder rather than a 2nd rounder. For that reason, we make it 2-0 NFL. Next up is Amani Oruwariye, a cornerback who played 2 years for Penn State, catching 7 interceptions, breaking up 20 passes, and being named a first-team all-conference player. After these 2 excellent seasons, Oruwariye entered the draft and was seen as a consensus 2nd-round pick, finding himself at 55 overall on the consensus big board, and even peaking at number 25 overall. However, in the 2019 draft, he wouldn't be taken until the 5th round, 146th overall, when he was selected by the Detroit Lions, giving him a draft fall of 91 total spots. In his rookie season, Oruwariye would play in 9 games. He'd catch 2 interceptions and break up 3 passes, but he allowed a passer rating of 108.5 against him and an 82% completion percentage in coverage. Although it was far from great, things were looking up as he was named a starter for the next season and played in 16 games. Allowing 42 receptions on 76 targets, he drastically lowered the completion percentage against him to a 55.3% completion rate and also dropped the passer rating against him to a 96. But despite this improvement in 2021, it was still an up and down year, as he missed 15 tackles, had 7 penalties, and allowed 733 yards, the 10th most in the NFL that season. But little did the Lions know that Amani was on the verge of a breakout, as he was one of the best cornerbacks in the game in 2021. In 14 games, Oruwariye would intercept 6 passes and break up another 11, while only allowing a 60.2 passer rating against him. Unfortunately for him, he'd injure his thumb and be placed on IR, but he was 3rd in the NFL in interceptions at the time he was injured, and he had shown that he could be a lockdown corner. If the story ended there, we could maybe say that consensus won this battle, but unfortunately, it does not. In 2022, starting 4 games, Amani would allow a 75% completion percentage and a passer rating of 130.6. His 30 PFF grade ranked dead last in the NFL, and he was also missing tackles in run defense, leading to him being a healthy scratch in Week 5 against the Patriots. From that point on, he'd play in a few more games, but he just couldn't repeat his success from 2021. Oruwariye has since signed with the Giants and the Jaguars, having not played the entirety of 2023, only 2 years removed from his breakout season. Although this one is a closer call because he had one really good season, I don't think anyone would argue that they'd be happy taking Oruwariye in the 2nd round, knowing how his career would pan out. He could have been a 2nd round value had he retained his same level of play, but it's proven to be an outlier season for him at this point in his career. Therefore, we award yet another point to the NFL, making it 3-0. But now we move to a name that everyone should know, CJ Gardner Johnson, a safety who attended the University of Florida and in 3 seasons there, had 161 tackles, 4 sacks, 9 interceptions, 15.5 TFLs, and 12 PBUs. This production led consensus to place him at 37 overall on the consensus big board, just a few picks outside of the 1st round. In the 2019 draft, he wouldn't be selected until the 4th round, 105th overall by the Saints, resulting in a draft fall of 68 spots. CJ would prove the doubters wrong immediately in his rookie year, being named a member of the PFWA All-Rookie team after playing in all 16 games. He'd start again the next season, putting together a 66 tackle, 31 defensive stop campaign while catching another interception and breaking up 13 passes. Absent from the scouting reports on CJ is also how good he was at trash talk, as in 2020, his trash talk legitimately got 3 separate wide receivers suspended: Javon Wims, Anthony Miller, and his own teammate Michael Thomas. Miller's suspension actually came in a playoff game, showing that Gardner's trash talk game was clutch, because Gardner could erase opponents even in the most important games of the season. This made CJ a love him or hate him type player, but a pretty damn funny one that most fans know, especially because of how iconic that clip is of Javon Wims sucker punching him in the face and CJ acting like a fly landed on him. In 2021, he'd have another good season for the Saints. He'd miss part of the year with an injury, but returned in December, ending the season with a career-high 3 interceptions alongside 46 tackles, 17 defensive stops, 7 PBUs, and 2 sacks. In 2022, CJ would be traded to the Eagles, which is honestly just the perfect fit for him, and he'd start the first 11 weeks before suffering a lacerated kidney in week 12 and being placed on IR. He'd eventually return from IR and play in the Super Bowl for Philly, but even missing time, he ended with a career-high 6 interceptions alongside 8 PBUs, 67 tackles, 17 defensive stops, and 1 sack. During the offseason, he signed a 1-year, $6.5 million deal with the Lions, but tore his pec in week 2, causing him to miss the majority of the season. Going into 2024, he now finds himself back on the Eagles after signing a 3-year, $27 million deal this offseason, an APY of $9 million per year, the 15th highest amongst safeties. Although I'd say it's close to a tie, I'm going to give this point to consensus. I wouldn't say that CJ has ever been considered one of the top 5 to 10 safeties in the game at any given point, but he's definitely been an above average starter for the majority of his career, and he's never been a below average starter. Although his PFF numbers indicate that he's heavily penalized and misses a good amount of tackles, he's been really good in coverage, forces a lot of turnovers, and finds himself near the ball a lot. He's at about the halfway point for value in terms of money paid, and he likely finds himself slightly undervalued in his contract because he's been kind of injury prone over the past few years, so in theory his value is maybe even higher than an APY of $9 million per year. The deciding factor for me is that he would simply not last until the 3rd round if this draft were done over again, so consensus was more on point than the NFL, giving them their first point of this video, 3-1. But we must be in danger because we're going to another safety, Julian Love of Notre Dame. In his 2 seasons as a full-time starter, Love would go on to record 36 pass breakups, 4 interceptions, and 94 tackles, leading to him being named an AP First-Team All-American and ending his junior season as a finalist for the Thorpe Award. Love would declare for the draft early and was viewed by consensus as the 42nd best player in the class, even peaking at number 6 overall. But in the draft, he fell all the way to the 4th round, where he was selected by the Giants at number 108 overall, a fall of 66 spots. In his first 3 seasons, Love would play 48 games, but only started in 16 of them, ultimately totaling around 1,700 defensive snaps. In those snaps, he'd get 167 tackles, 13 PBUs, 3 interceptions, 40 defensive stops, and 1 forced fumble. Although he was an excellent tackler, only missing 12 tackles in his first season, he was very up and down in coverage, as quarterbacks averaged a completion percentage of 71% and a passer rating of 107 when targeting him, and his average PFF coverage grade over the 3 seasons was a 59.1. In 2022, his 4th season, he was finally named the full-time starter, starting 16 games and playing over 1,000 snaps for the first time in his career. This would be his best season yet, as he'd finished the year with 124 tackles, 1 sack, 1 forced fumble, 5 PBUs, 2 interceptions, and 30 defensive stops. He also improved in coverage, decreasing his passer rating allowed to a 97 and earning a 71.5 PFF coverage grade, while still being an amazing tackler for the safety position, with only a 5.5% missed tackle rate, the 9th best in the league. This would earn him a solid 2-year, $12 million deal with the Seattle Seahawks to be their starting safety, and he'd reward them by having an even better year. In 2023, Love had 123 tackles, 2 forced fumbles, 10 PBUs, 4 interceptions, 25 defensive stops, an 83.7 passer rating allowed, and an 80.4 PFF coverage grade, leading to him being named a Pro Bowler and voted by his fellow players as the 95th best player in the NFL. With this elevated performance, the Seahawks wasted no time giving him a pay raise, signing him to a 3-year extension on July 27th, worth $33 million, a per-year average of $11 million, 11th highest of all safeties in the NFL. Although Love hasn't been a key contributor his entire career, he's now a Pro Bowler, a top 100 player, and a cemented starter getting paid like a top 25% player at his position. Maybe the late development track makes it such that you want to call him a late 2nd to an early 3rd, but consensus was still far closer to his value with an early 2nd round valuation compared to the NFL's 4th round valuation. If he continues his high level of play, it can definitely be said with more certainty, but it is a difficult decision given his first few seasons. But for a player who seems like he's on the rise, we'll give this point to consensus, making this a 3-2 ball game. Don't call it a comeback. Now, we'll switch back to the offensive side of the ball with Iowa State wide receiver Hakeem Butler, a 6'5", 227-pound behemoth with 97th percentile height, a 98th percentile wingspan, and 98th percentile hand size, alongside athletic traits to earn him a 9.53 RAS score. Butler was seen as a player with all the raw traits to become a superstar, but he also had some development to do. Even with the development needed though, Butler put up over 1,300 yards and 9 touchdowns on 60 receptions in his junior season with Iowa State. After his huge season, Butler declared for the draft and was viewed by consensus as the 38th best player in the class. However, when the draft rolled around, Butler wouldn't be drafted until the 4th round, 103rd overall by the Arizona Cardinals, resulting in a draft fall of 65 total spots. To say the least, Butler's NFL career has been rocky. To say the most, it's been horrible. Butler broke his hand in August before his rookie season, causing him to miss the entirety of his rookie year. He'd be waived to September of the next year and bounced around on different teams' practice squads before ultimately being waived by the Eagles in August of 2021. In 2022, he'd signed with 2 different CFL teams, but was ultimately released by both of them as well. When it looked like all hope was lost, he signed with the St. Louis Battlehawks of the XFL, and he actually did well there, putting up 599 yards and 8 touchdowns on 51 receptions, leading to being named to the All-XFL team in 2023. The Steelers gave him a shot to make the team for the 2023 season, but he was placed on IR again with an unspecified injury during the preseason, and he was released from the team only a few days after. He returned to the XFL for the 2024 season and had another great year, this time putting up 652 yards and 5 touchdowns, which led to him being named the UFL Offensive Player of the Year. With that performance, he just recently signed with the Bengals to compete for a spot on their roster for the upcoming 2024 season. But even if it seems like there's still hope for his NFL career, it's still obvious that the NFL was right on him up to this point, as Butler has yet to record a single reception in the NFL. With his injury history and non-existent production, he hasn't even been worth a 4th round pick, nonetheless a 2nd. For that reason, the NFL brings the gap back to a 4-2 lead. But you'll already know where this next one's going, so let's just call it 4-3. That's right, we're talking about DK Metcalf, who was viewed by consensus as the 18th overall player, a mid-first rounder. But he wasn't taken until the 64th overall pick, the last pick of the 2nd round, a draft fall of 46 spots. Let's just make this simple. Metcalf has started in 81 of 82 possible games. He's a 2-time Pro Bowler, a 1-time All-Pro, has the 5th highest PFR approximate value in the entire 2019 NFL draft class, multiple finishes in the top 10 in receiving touchdowns in the NFL, multiple finishes in the top 20 in receptions, 3 seasons in the top 20 in receiving yards, multiple finishes in the top 20 of PFF receiving grade, multiple finishes in the top 20 in yards per route run, and he was signed to an extension that gives him the 10th highest APY amongst active receivers. The production is there, the stats are there, the contract tells us how the league views him, and that's as a bona fide, high-level NFL player. Now, is DK the perfect wide receiver? No. He can be limited in many ways and doesn't often find himself in the discussion of the top 3 to 5 wide receivers in the NFL. But with a mid-first rounder and number 18 overall, you'll be lucky to get a player who is as good as DK Metcalf at their position. We don't need all the fluff here. Consensus was clearly right on Metcalf, so we'll move on. But next, we have our first edge rusher on the list, Chase Winovich, former 4-star prospect who played his college ball at Michigan and was named AP All-American 3rd Team, AFCA All-American 2nd Team, All-Big Ten honoree, and was a semifinalist for the Bednarik Award in his senior season. With these honors in mind, consensus placed him at number 45 overall on the consensus big board. But in the 2019 draft, he'd be taken number 77 overall by the Patriots, a draft fall of 32 spots. In his first 2 seasons with the Pats, Winovich would play in 32 games, starting 9 of them, collecting 11 sacks and 70 pressures on 580 pass rush snaps, while adding 10 TFLs, 31 defensive stops, 1 forced fumble, 2 pass deflections, and an interception. In his second season, 2020, his 15.2 pass rush win rate was actually the 10th best in the NFL of all players with at least 300 pass rushing snaps, and his 47 pressures and 72.3 PFF pass rushing grade were both 24th of the 62 qualifiers. Although he was doing fairly well and appeared to be on the up and up, things started to take a turn for the worse. During the offseason, Winovich was relegated to a rotational role, as the Patriots signed both Matthew Judon and Kyle Van Noy to start over him at the edge rusher position. On top of that, Winovich was placed on the PUP list in July before the season, missing much of training camp. Although he'd return, he'd quickly injure his hamstring in October and was placed on IR, missing an entire month. By the end of the 2021 season, he managed to play in 13 of the Patriots games, but he only had 112 snaps, 11 tackles, 0 sacks, and 4 pressures. The next season, he'd be traded to the Cleveland Browns in exchange for Mack Wilson, who we already talked about. Winovich again injured his hamstring in the first season with the Browns, causing him to miss 2 months of the season. But he managed to play in 8 games, totaling 178 snaps, getting 20 tackles, 1 sack, and 11 pressures. After this short stint with the Browns, Winovich signed with the Dolphins and only played 5 snaps for them before being released in October of 2023, and then announcing his retirement a week later. Based on his NFL production, no one thought he was going to be a superstar, but he looked to be a solid number 3 edge piece after his first 2 seasons. But the injuries appeared to take their toll, hurting his ability to compete for the starting spot and to make an impact as a free agent. So based on the production he's had, his injury history, and his recent retirement, we can confidently say that the NFL gets the point for this player, 5'3". We'll stay on defense here with Greedy Williams, the LSU cornerback who couldn't possibly have a better name. In college, he was greedy indeed, intercepting 8 passes and deflecting 20 of them in only 2 seasons, leading to being named first-team All-Conference in both 2017 and 2018, as well as an AP All-American in both seasons. With his production, a sub-4.4 40-yard dash, and almost 6'2" frame putting him in the 90th percentile for height, it's no wonder why Greedy was seen by consensus as the 16th best player in the 2019 draft. But we know what this video is about. He was picked 46th overall by the Cleveland Browns, a fall of 30 spots. Greedy had an okay rookie campaign. He started 12 games, and on 52 targets, he had 2 PBUs and allowed 31 receptions, 416 yards, 1 touchdown, and a 91.5 passer rating against him. At the end of the season, his 53.6 coverage grade was 71st in the NFL of 85 qualifiers. Although it wasn't the hottest start, he unfortunately didn't have the opportunity to improve in his second year, as a nerve injury kept him off the field in the entirety of 2020. But when he returned in 2021, he showed marked improvement, playing in 16 games, starting 8 of them, and being targeted 62 times, deflecting 10 passes, catching 2 interceptions, and allowing only 36 receptions, a completion percentage of 58%, and a 71.7 passer rating against him. His coverage grade would also improve to a 68.8, giving him the 29th best coverage grade in the league. But despite things looking up, it all came crashing down in 2022. Williams would go down with a hamstring injury in September, causing him to be placed on IR, at which time he was replaced by MJ Emerson. And when he returned, he was straight up bad, allowing a perfect passer rating against him of 158.3 and dropping his coverage grade to a 49.6, 188th in the NFL. After the season played out, he'd sign a 1-year deal with the Eagles, but was released before the season. He was unable to find a team for 2023 and sat out the whole year, with the most recent development being that he just tried out for the Dolphins in the end of July. Because we have to give the point to someone, it has to go to the NFL. But no one is really the winner here, as Williams has not provided the value of a first or a second rounder. He's played 2 NFL seasons, one of which was a below average rookie year, and the other was a good season. But one good season is not enough to justify a mid-first round pick or a second round pick, and it looks like he might be out of the league for good, unless he can fight his way onto a roster and stay healthy. 6'3". Next up is offensive tackle Jawan Taylor, who played his college ball at Florida and, according to NFL.com, was seen as one of the best offensive linemen in the country by NFL scouts. Consensus scouts placed Taylor at 13th overall, but the NFL wasn't quite as high on him as reported, because he wouldn't be picked by the Jaguars until he was taken 35th overall, a 22-spot drop. Taylor was an immediate starter, playing every game in his first 2 seasons, but the results were rough. In those 2 seasons, Taylor allowed 99 pressures, 17 sacks, 72 hurries, and 10 QB hits, while being penalized 20 times. His 9 sacks allowed in his rookie season was the 5th most, his 8 sacks allowed in his second season was the 3rd most, and his 58 pressures allowed in his second season were the most in the league. Also in his second season, his 95.2 pass block efficiency rating placed him as the 50th offensive tackle in the league out of 52 qualifiers. He'd slightly improve in 2021, again starting every game, but lowering his pressures to 34, which was tied for 22nd, allowing 6 sacks, 3 quarterback hits, and 25 hurries. This gave him a 97 pass block efficiency rating, ranking 20th out of 47. His penalty problems did continue though, as he'd be penalized 12 times in 2021. But in 2022, his contract year, he'd have a breakout season. Yet again, starting every game, Taylor only allowed 16 pressures, the 6th best in the league, giving up 5 sacks and 11 hurries. He also got his penalties down to only 7 and had a pass block efficiency rating of 98.4, 5th best in the NFL. This would lead to him signing a huge 4-year, $80 million contract with the Chiefs, an APY of $20 million per year, the 11th best APY of all offensive tackles in the NFL. But 2023 was a year of regression for him. It all started with that first Monday Night Football game of the season, where Taylor got away with moving before every snap, which led to the NFL cracking down on him and penalizing him a total of 20 times in 2023, the most in the NFL by a wide margin, as the second most penalized player had 12 penalties, a full 8 less. These 20 penalties actually cost Kansas City a full 7 yards per game. And as we know, the Chiefs' offense really sucks, so that really hurts them. He'd start every game, but he gave up 47 pressures, the 8th most in the league, allowing 5 sacks, 9 QB hits, and 33 hurries, giving him a pass block efficiency of 96.2, 36th in the NFL of 58 qualifiers. His 51.6 PFF grade was 4th worst in the NFL, and 2023 would be the 3rd season in which Taylor would have under a 45 PFF run blocking grade. In total, Taylor has been an extremely durable player, immediately starting right out of the gate. He's shown the floor to not be a completely horrible player, but he's really only had 1 season where he was even considered good. Despite being paid like a top-tier offensive tackle, this contract is already being seen as an overpay by NFL and Chiefs fans alike. Taylor doesn't have any Pro Bowls or All-Pros to back up what his contract says about him, and he's had more bad seasons than good ones. He's been heavily penalized, and he struggled as a run blocker consistently throughout his career. Although he has the playing time and contract of a player who would justify a mid-first, I just can't find that consensus was right on this pick, given his level of play, lack of awards, and number of penalties. Perhaps he could return to his 2022 form in 2024 and play out the rest of his contract like that guy he was paid to be, but right now I think his production and value to a team has been closer to a second rounder than a mid-first. So in my judgment, this point goes to the NFL, 7-3. With the NFL now taking a commanding lead, we'll discuss quarterback Drew Lock, who is a 4-year starter for Missouri, throwing for the second most yards and third most touchdowns in SEC history. Going into the draft, Lock was viewed as the 22nd best player by consensus, having peaked at number 8 overall. However, in the draft, he'd fall to number 42 overall, where he was taken by the Broncos, a draft fall of 20 spots. Lock suffered a thumb injury early, causing him to miss much of his rookie season, but upon his return, he was named the starter, finishing out the last 5 games of the season and leading the Broncos to a 4-1 record, while throwing for over 1,000 yards, 7 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, and completing 64% of his passes. The next season, he'd get a real shot for the starting job. He'd play 13 games that year due to a shoulder injury suffered in week 2, causing him to miss a few games, and a later exposure to COVID, which resulted in the infamous Kendall Hinton game, when the entire Broncos quarterback room was put in COVID protocol. But when he did play that season, the results weren't good. He'd only complete 57% of his passes, throw for 2,900 yards, and had 16 touchdowns against 15 interceptions, ending the season with a 75.4 passer rating and a 4-9 record. The next season, 2021, the Broncos brought in Teddy B to compete with Lock for the starting job, and Lock lost, sitting for the majority of the season as the Broncos' second-string quarterback. He played sparingly, replacing Teddy when he was injured, and then finished out the last 4 games of the season when Teddy was injured once again. But he hadn't improved much, completing 60% of his passes, throwing 2 touchdowns to 2 interceptions, and having an 80.4 passer rating. The next offseason, he'd be traded to Seattle as part of the Russell Wilson deal, and he was welcomed with open arms by new head coach Pete Carroll, who raved about his skill set, even saying that he believed the Seahawks had 2 number 1 quarterbacks in Geno Smith and Drew Lock. The two were pitted against each other, and Drew Lock lost his second straight training camp battle, sitting behind Geno Smith for the 2022 season without playing a single snap. Lock would play in a few games in 2023, completing 48 of 76 passes, a completion percentage of 63% for 543 yards, 3 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, and a passer rating of 81.2. But he only played in games where Geno was hurt. This brings us to present day, where Lock has signed a 1-year, $5 million deal to join the Giants. It was thought that he might actually compete for the starting quarterback job, but he himself has denied that, acknowledging that he's the Giants' backup quarterback for 2024. Although neither consensus or the NFL was really right on Lock's value, the NFL was definitely more correct than consensus. Lock has had 3 opportunities to solidify himself as a starter: his sophomore season, in his training camp battle with Teddy, and in his training camp battle with Geno. But he was unable to show that he was a trustworthy NFL starter. At this point, he's a solid backup, playing on backup money, who maybe still has some potential, but he's simply just not worth a first-round pick based on his production up to this point. So based on all of that, we award the NFL the point, making it 8-3. But like that dude on the rec court who celebrates when you're down by 30, we come in hot now with A.J. Brown, DK Metcalf's Ole Miss teammate. Just like his teammate, this one is obvious, if not more so. Nobody was really right on Brown, as consensus had him at 34th overall, and the NFL took him at 51 overall, a 17-spot drop. But Brown has shown that he's worth a top 5 overall pick, if not the number 1 overall draft pick, as he's one of the 5 best wide receivers in the NFL right now. He's a 3-time Pro Bowler, 2-time All-Pro selection, only has 1 season under 1,000 yards in a season where he was hurt. He has multiple seasons finishing top 5 in the NFL in yards, 3 seasons finishing top 12 in the NFL in touchdowns, multiple seasons finishing top 15 in receptions, and he's currently the 2nd highest paid wide receiver in the NFL in terms of APY. He was actually so valuable to the Eagles that after signing a 4-year, $100 million deal in 2022, they extended him after this last season, increasing his APY from $25 to $32 million per year. Even more evidence of his value is that when Brown was traded from the Titans to the Eagles, he was traded for a first-round pick, and he's only gotten better since that point. So yeah, this is an easy win for consensus. Even if they were wrong, they were still more right than the NFL, so we give them the point, ending this video with a score of 8-4. We've now revisited the biggest steals and draft fallers of the 2019 NFL Draft. Although the NFL is up 8-4, there are a couple reasons we can't really draw too many conclusions from this video alone. For one, I have a whole spreadsheet worth of massive reaches and falls that would just take too long to discuss because there's over 100 players on it. So in the interest of time, I just chose to talk about players that I thought people would be interested in. So part of this is based on the sample size of the players that I'm discussing. Second, the NFL has an inherent advantage in that if they're lower on a player, they're less likely to give them an opportunity, therefore making it more difficult for them to reach the potential seen by consensus. And the NFL also has more access to tape, medical information, and personality information. Third, this is a relative standard, as opposed to an objective one. Even the NFL has been pretty wrong on some of these players, but has still gotten a point because they just happen to be more correct than consensus. And lastly, this is just one draft, and only the fallers of that one draft, not even the reaches, which we'll discuss in a future video. Although we can't quite draw conclusions yet, we still have plenty of other drafts to revisit and plenty of other players in each draft, so make sure to subscribe for all upcoming videos, where I'll be going over the reaches and fallers of past drafts. I'd love to hear what you guys think below. Who did you love in this draft? Where'd they go? Were you right or wrong? Who do you want to see discussed in the 2019 draft reaches video? I'd love to hear, so make sure to leave a comment. I'd appreciate a like as well, as it really helps out the video and it lets me know that you guys enjoy this content. But that's enough yapping for today. Later.